All right, well, we've got a pretty good number of folks here, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kelsey Field. I probably haven't met most of you. I recently joined the Women's Fund team during the pandemic and have been working here for about a year. I'm actually on our fundraising team, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, but I'm really excited to walk you through our grant making cycle guidelines and eligibility and how to apply for a grant during our 2022 grant making cycle this year. But before we get started, I will turn it over to Kelly.
So hello, everyone. I am going to be brief so that you can hear the important stuff. The most important thing for you all to know is that we're so grateful for all of you joining us and for wanting to be a part of our grant making process. The Women's Fund was founded on the principle that women-led and especially women of color-led equity building initiatives in our community and organizations and leaders who are focused on that don't get the courageous capital that they need to make that work a reality. And the Women's Fund and women's funds all across the country and the world, frankly, have been started to fix that problem. The problem is that we do it while we're fighting some of those same gender norms and biases for a variety of gender identities on our own in trying to raise courageous capital that we can then move to all of you. But we relish that role that we play in being able to be a public foundation that is focused deeply on gender equity and how that intersects with racism and economic status and so many other things. So without you, that courageous capital would not be flowing so meaningfully into the community, and we're so proud that you're applying. Please know, I've been a member of this board, the Women's Fund board, for many years before I took this role. I served on the grants committee for many years as a board member, and I'm really honored to be on this side, and we stand ready to help you. We take very seriously that we are a trust-based philanthropist, meaning that we know you know what you want to accomplish. The only thing we all have to agree on is that we're focused on social change. And obviously our application seeks to have you highlight how you're focused on social change. And so Kelsey is definitely going to help walk you through how to make the most of our application. Please know that the changes and efficiencies that we've been making to this application over the past couple of years are meant to try to make this process as efficient and effective for all of you, all of our grant readers, and ultimately our grant making process overall. So if there's things you've been used to and it's changed, please always assume that what we're trying to do is make it more efficient and more effective. So don't worry if it feels like there's a hoop you're not jumping through. That's the point. And just ask a question if you've applied before and you're not sure. We don't want you wasting any time wringing your hands. We want you to feel like we are here for you. We are accessible. Unfortunately, we do have a budget that goes to our grants every year, and it's not unlimited yet, although we're working very hard to make it unlimited. And so just know that if you have a question, ask it, send it to our grants email, and I am always happy to help. Our entire team is always happy to help, and we look forward to seeing your submissions. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll give it back to Kelsey.
Great, thank you, Kelly. So we'll be going quickly over today a really brief segment about the Women's Fund, who we are, what we do. We'll dive into our grant making guidelines, the process for applying for a grant during the cycle, and then we'll go over some important dates and deadlines, and there will be plenty of time at the end for Q&A if you have any questions. So about the Women's Fund. The Women's Fund is a public foundation, and our mission is to transform the lives of women and girls. We do that through mobilizing the collective power and passion of all people working together. And that's our mission has been the same since the very beginning. We're actually celebrating 20 years this year, and we've never wavered from this mission to transform the lives of women and girls. We really believe that everyone can have a part in creating gender equity. And our vision is a world where gender equity is the norm for everyone in work and in life. We're really committed to creating social change through a few different main lanes. One of those is our strategic grant making. We also do some pretty groundbreaking research. We've released 5 major research reports about gender equity, and then we also do advocacy. Much of it is through our advocacy grant partners who are on the ground working hard to pass better legislation and policies that impact women and families. So that's us in a nutshell. Most of you probably know a good bit about us, so we don't want to spend too much time on that. But of course, we're happy to answer any questions about what we do. Going into our grant making guidelines, so proposals that are submitted to the Women's Fund really have to meet these 4 main criteria. They have to align with our strategic priorities, use a gender lens, disrupt gender norms, and create social change. And we'll go into what each of those means in the following slides. So our strategic priorities fall into 2 categories: economic empowerment and leadership for women and girls. Underneath those 2 categories, there are a lot of subcategories, many of which you've seen before. These haven't changed. These have been our strategic priorities for a while. And we really feel that these categories are main drivers. Not just feel that, we know that these are main drivers to economic security and wealth building for women based on our research, based on data. These are the priorities that we've chosen to focus on: childcare and the benefits cliff, access to contraception, reduction of teen pregnancy via comprehensive medically accurate sex education, paid leave, and pay equity, or what falls under economic empowerment. And then under leadership, we fund programs and proposals that are focused on women running for elected office, advocacy training, voting rights and informed voting, women's leadership and influence on policy, girls' leadership, and then women's philanthropy. Going forward, using a gender lens. So when we say a program uses a gender lens, we mean that it examines an issue with a focus on the lived experience of women and girls. And it basically acknowledges that gender can have a significant impact on a woman or a girl's opportunities in life. So using a gender lens might include some of the following, and this is taken from the applications. You'll see this there. But whether women and girls were involved in the planning of the program or the making of the program, whether the gender lens is intersectional, this is really important. So knowing that women come from all different backgrounds, and depending on race and age and other factors, could have a really different experience. We're also focused on making sure that that gender lens is intersectional. We also focus on how barriers to participation have been taken into account for your program. So if childcare access is an issue or anything like that, how is that being accounted for in your program? Are you trying to meet those needs as much as possible? And then lastly, how a gender lens focus is maintained if the program also serves men and boys. So we really want to fund programs and proposals that align with our mission to transform the lives of women and girls. We also know that gender is fluid and that some organizations serve people of all genders. We want to make sure that that gender focus is still there and that there is a specific impact on women and girls. Disrupting gender norms is similar to using a gender lens. Gender norms are basically the conventional ideas that we have been taught in society about what it means to be a man or a woman and what types of roles those people are expected to fill. And so we're really looking for programs and projects that are disrupting those conventional ideas of what gender norms are in our society. Ideas like women should be at home, men should, be the CEO. Ideas like that are examples of gender norms. And so we ask you as part of this application, what are the explicit or implicit gender norms that your program is disrupting? And how will disrupting these gender norms impact society overall and impact systemic gender inequality? So like I said, those can be explicit or implicit, and there's obviously a variety to choose from. So we want to know how your program is addressing gender norms. And then lastly here, creating social change. So at the Women's Fund, we really are focused on not just short-term change, but long-term change. And we want to address the root causes of some of the systemic inequities in our society. We measure creating social change in 5 primary ways, and we call them the 5 shifts of social change. So if you've received a grant from us before or applied in the past, you've probably heard of these, so we'll quickly run through them. But basically, the first one is a shift in definition. So the issue is defined differently in the community or society. People start to see it differently. A shift in behavior is people start acting differently. So they're not just seeing it differently, but they're actually changing the way that they act. A shift in engagement, more people are involved in solving the issue. More people in the community are engaged, talking about it, acting on it. a shift in policy. So that's an institutional, legislative, or organizational policy that has been actively changed that helps promote social change. And then lastly is maintaining or holding the line. And this is really, really important. It's where earlier progress has been maintained in the face of opposition. So we know that especially during the pandemic, holding the line has been a huge part of social change, just making sure that we don't roll back on policies that have already gotten us where we are today and that we don't lose that progress. So we measure social change in those 5 primary ways. And again, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. We can go back if you have any questions about that. The application process is really straightforward this year. So we'll talk about eligibility, how to apply, and then we also want to share with you how decision-making is made in this fund. We, as Kelly said, are a trust-based funder. We try to be very transparent. And so we'll walk through sort of after you hit submit, what happens next. So organizations that apply must be a 501c3, a registered federal 501c3, or have a 501c3 fiscal agent. So basically you have to be a nonprofit organization or have a nonprofit organization as your fiscal agent, and you'll have to have that in writing. And you must serve women and girls located in Central Ohio, and we define Central Ohio as Central Ohio counties, which include Delaware, Fairfield, Franklin, Licking, Madison, Pickaway, and Union County. So we obviously get a lot of proposals from Franklin. So if you're in a county that's not Franklin, we definitely encourage you to apply. We want to impact, all of Central Ohio and Greater Columbus. So those are the 2 main eligibility requirements for strictly submitting a proposal. Here's some things that would disqualify you from having your proposal move forward. So we do not fund organizations that create a disrespectful atmosphere for anyone in the LGBTQ identity space, and we do not fund organizations that seek to restrict reproductive rights. We also do not fund programs that promote any of the list of activities here. So we don't fund programs that promote religious activities or beliefs, promote political campaigns, advance capital or endowment campaigns. We're really looking for, programs and funds cannot be used for event sponsorship or scholarship for individual students. And it cannot conduct co-educational programs that are not specifically focused on women and girls. So that goes back to the gender lens. We want to make sure that women and girls focus is maintained despite the participants of the program. How to apply. So one really important thing to note if you've applied in the past is that there is no LOI requirement this year. We looked at the data and we recognized that many people who submitted the LOI made it on to the grant application, full application. And so when we thought about that, we really wanted to make sure that these great programs, we know that a lot of you work on small teams, aren't spending too much time on an LOI when you definitely would qualify for the full application, and wanted to cut out that requirement in alignment with our values of being a trust-based funder and knowing that you know your work best. And also, we have these workshops and lots of technical assistance to help you know if you would be a good fit or not. So there is no LOI this year. Our application is through JotForm, which is the same that we've used in the past if you've applied in the past, and can be found on our website at womensfundcentralohio.org/grants/apply. This form does not allow you to save your progress, unfortunately. So we really encourage you to type your responses in a Word document and then paste them into the application. In order to make this easier for you, I know I've applied for a lot of grants where I've copied and pasted all the questions into a Word document. We actually have a template that you can use on our website that's an exact copy of all the questions that'll be in the application, where you can type all your responses there, know how what your word count is shaking out to be, make sure that you fall within those limits, and then you can copy and paste them into the JotForm. And that template can be found on our website at that same URL under grants/apply. So our decision-making process. So we do believe here at the Women's Fund in participatory grant application reading. Many of you have probably been grant readers or heard about this in the past, but essentially we really believe that those who are receiving funding and the girls and the women that are served by the programs that we fund should have a voice at the table. That's how we ensure that the funding that we're giving out is not only equitable, but that it's effective and that it's being directed at who needs this programming, who is this programming serving. So for example, we fund a lot of organizations and programs focused on high school girls. So we really believe that high school girls should be at that table, and we seek to recruit a variety of high school girls to help read these grant applications and score them. So that's our participatory grant reading model. We strive very hard to get women and men of all ages and ethnicities and backgrounds so that we have a very diverse representation of our community, that our decision making is shared with the communities that we're aiming to serve and to impact. So we will be hosting our annual grant application reading day in December, on December 11th. And our community grant readers will review and discuss all eligible applications. So when you apply, we'll review that internally, make sure that you meet kind of the minimum criteria, that you're a 501c3. And then all of those will go to our community readers. We'll have a great, very long, fun day of everyone reading the applications and scoring them. And then applications that score 70 out of 100 are sent to our grants committee. Our grants committee is made up of board members and former grant readers who have been grant readers for a long time. And that committee is the one that really dives into the applications that make it that far and looks at them with a really critical lens and says, you know, they look at our budget and the grants that went through to that round, and they put together a proposed slate of grants that they would like to fund. And then they recommend that funding slate to our board of directors. And our board of directors, the Women's Fund, ultimately makes that final decision on the approved slate. So that's how it works. And we do try to be, like I said, just really mindful of equity, making sure that not only the grant readers that we recruit are representative of our community, but also that the groups themselves are representative of the community as well and representative of that diversity. So we try to make sure that each group has a variety of voices, a variety of ages. If you've participated in the past, you'll know that we have 15 to 20 groups reading the applications. And so we try to make sure that, you know, equity is represented on every level of this process. Lastly here, we're going to go through a few important dates and deadlines. So the application has been open for about a week, and we'll be offering technical assistance from now until the day the grant applications are due. When technical assistance, by that we mean basically just being ready to answer your questions. The grant application is due on Friday, October 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So assuming all of you are in Ohio, but that will be closing at 5 p.m. on October 29th. And then, like I said, our grant application reading day will be Saturday, December 11th. It takes us a couple months to get all those grant applications sorted and scored and over to our grants committee. And so our grant funding announcement will come out in February of 2022. And then funds will be released within 30 days of that funding announcement. That is our plan right now. For technical assistance, you can always call us. Our phone number is on the website, but the best way to reach us and to reach Steph here, who's managing our grants process this year, is to email us at grants@womensfundcentralohio.org. And we'll get back to you, usually within 24 hours. With that, I will stop talking. I know that was a lot of information, but want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. So please feel free to turn on your microphone if you have any questions, and we are here to help. And I'm happy to go back to any previous slides as well if you'd like me to.
I guess if you want to put a question in the chat too, if you feel like you that's fine too. One thing I would say that I know, you know, our grant process normally would be a little bit earlier in the year, but as we've evolved and rolled with the pandemic, just like all of you, that's why our grant process now has the reading happening in December and the final decision being formalized around February. And it will be our goal, I think, to get back to sort of pre-COVID scheduling where we start this process a little earlier in the year and finish it by year end. But with that said, if you're applying for a program that starts on January 1, also know, and our materials state this, but I want to make sure the grant can be used for expenses that start as of January 1. This is a calendar year grant, and there's no hurdle there to, when you get our check, you're basically reimbursing yourself for some things that you paid for earlier in the year before the grant check came through. That's just fine. So again, we're not here. There's no gotcha moments with our grant making. First of all, we know that our grants are not the largest ones, hopefully, that you'll ever get. But we do hope that they're very strategic in that the way that you get it and the things you're able to use it for will help you continue to get to your next. So never be afraid to ask about a technicality like that. We're not trying to catch you up.
I see a question in the chat here. Thank you, Kelly. We'll answer this question in just a second. I did want to add to, I think something that makes the Women's Fund really unique and something that's important to call out is that we will fund operations, we'll fund salaries. We know that someone has to make this awesome work happen. We understand that very deeply. And so don't be afraid to put on your application. You'll have the opportunity to select, some of this funding will go to salaries. We completely understand that. And I think that's what makes the Women's Fund really unique. I am quickly looking up this question in the chat. So someone in the chat asked, can one organization apply for both areas of focus, leadership and social and economic change? So the way the application is structured is you actually select one of the sub-focuses. So you don't actually select between one of the other. You select one of the sub-focuses. So that would be the childcare and the benefits cliff, access to contraception, pay equity, whatever. You'll select the one that best describes the focus of your program. We know that a lot of your programs might focus on a lot of different things, but we really are trying to narrow it down to what's the one thing that you're really working towards. And from there, that just helps us with reporting and helps us to understand where we're getting the most applications from by focus area. So we ask you on the application to select the one area that your program most focuses on.
And I would just add that certainly, in some of the narrative response, you can certainly add, that flavor. You don't have to feel bad about saying, we believe we kind of cut across these areas. But we do, in talking with our donors, right? One of the ways that we can steward them toward actually investing more is the number one question the Women's Fund gets is, what do you do? Despite having made over $4 million in grants, done 5 research projects, done State House days, people routinely still say to us, what do you do? And so one of the ways that we can actually help them understand what we do is that we do provide them with an announcement about the grants that we make. And we do try to help them understand what lane those grants are in with regard to our mission work. So when you make this selection, what you're also doing is helping us represent you well, because otherwise we're going to try to put you in a bucket and we don't want to put you in the wrong bucket. So what we're really asking you to do is kind of say, listen, if I had to say our overarching thing is this area, if you were talking to donors about us, we'd love to be in this category. But that doesn't mean that in your narrative answers, you couldn't highlight how you cross some of our, we would expect that you cross a couple of lanes in the social change realm, and that's fine too. Again, this is not a test or a catch. What we're trying to do is represent you, your work, and our investments in you well.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Definitely don't be shy.
Well, yeah, I just asked that because our overall focus of our program is teen pregnancy prevention, but we also do have another program that focuses on the development and leadership of young girls. So we're actually within the middle school and high schools as well. So we have 2 areas of focus, and I just didn't know how to really embody that within the grant, or if it would need to be possibly 2 applications.
No. So yeah. So what I would say, number one, is definitely don't ever default to 2 applications without asking us, because as I said, our job as a Women's Fund is to make this as straightforward for you as possible. And it would not make sense for you to have to fill it out twice unless you literally have 2 different programs going that you want to apply for. So what I would say in that situation, I'm not going to make the call for you, but my gut would be pregnancy prevention definitely goes into that area we have about contraception or education, or how you're approaching that to help women understand their bodies. However, you should definitely say that as part of the program, they also learn leadership skills. Or you could make the reverse call and say, we really believe what we're doing is teaching leadership, and one of the things they talk about is understanding your own body or preventing pregnancy. You can make the call which one, mention both in the application, but I think if you were then to be listed, say, in a press release where we say, here's all the grants we gave, think about which bucket would you want to be. This was a program that funds that contraception and those sorts of things, or do you want to be in the leadership lane? And we're going to trust you again to put your program in that. And it's not that we're ever would want to fund one lane of a program differently than another. If that's helpful.
It's very helpful.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to see your question out loud or you don't want to put it in the chat, please feel free to DM me, Kelsey Fields, and I'm happy to answer it anonymously as well. Any other questions?
So Kelsey, I see when it says, are you open to broad definitions of leadership for girls?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm pulling up our application here just to see exactly what it says. So under the priority areas, you'll select the option is girls leadership, which is what it sounds like. And I think, yeah, we would be curious to see how what the definition of your program is. And so I think as long as it aligns with gender norms, gender lens, and social change, I think that there are obviously lots of definitions of what leadership for girls could look like. It could be a class, it could be, girls on the run. There are lots and lots of definitions of what that could look like. So I would definitely say, yeah, we are open to broad definitions of leadership for girls, is the short answer, yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
What is the grant amount? So pulling up again exactly what's on our application here.
I can say, the maximum amount through this program is $20,000. There are these annual grant pods, but you can ask for a specific amount if you know exactly the line you're trying to cover, and it's $10,250. You can apply for that amount, but $20,000 is the maximum amount that can be applied for through this process.
Yeah, and on here, yeah, like Kelly said, you can say how much you're requesting, and then we ask, what is the total cost for this program? We just want to see sort of like what percentage of your program costs are you asking for from us? But again, the maximum is 20,000. I see another question here.
Let me just say, Kels, before we jump off that, the one thing I would say too is we asked that question too because we do want to know if sometimes we do get a lot of applications, and our goal is to get motivational dollars in the hands of as many of you that we can help move you forward as possible. And sometimes that means, given the grant budget that we have, we may not be able to give you the full 20,000, but we might be able to give you 15. And what we want to know though is if you get 15, is it going to be a no-go? We just can't do the if you don't give us the full 20, this won't happen. We do need to know that because we are, while we're still trying to build our fund as big as we can, we do want to make sure that we're not giving dollars to someone that they're going to give back or not use because the program didn't end up happening. That actually lessens the opportunity for someone who actually could have deployed the funds. And so we're just trying to make sure that we understand that so that we don't give you a full amount, and it would be a prohibitive moment for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And someone else asked in the chat, do the grant amounts vary or is there a certain amount already set? So the grant amounts do vary. We have an amount in our budget that we hope to give out. And basically what we'll do is we'll look all the applications together and we'll kind of weigh exactly what Kelly said, like what can happen at different amounts, how much did everyone ask for, knowing that the need is so much greater than what we are able to provide, unfortunately, and we make the decisions from there. I see that there's a question in the chat that says, if we want to apply for operating costs, what would that be separate from a specific program grant? So how it works is you are sort of applying for your program and what you're trying to achieve, but under the budget section, there are different options for what you would like your funds to be used towards. And one of those is salary, program materials, rent, different things. So you would just basically mark that you're using the funds for operating, but assuming still there is some sort of like program aspect related to that or whatever work you are doing with women and girls would be that program part of the application. One of the restrictions was not providing scholarships to individual students. Does that include providing financial assistance to participants who can't afford program application fees? No, it does not. So actually in the budget, you actually can select participant incentives. So the scholarships to individual students is specifically like if this were going to a scholarship for an individual student to go to college or something like that, but does not include participant incentives. That is perfectly within the guidelines.
Yeah, so program related costs that you're trying to make sure you can cover, we do fund that. But if it's, if you're planning to make an application on behalf of the Sally Smith Scholarship Fund for Whitmore University, that is not something that we fund. We don't help people go to one particular college or pick certain students out of high school to go to the next step. That's not within our grant priorities right now.
Right. How many applications do we typically receive and how many grants do we typically award? So I think the grant applications is a little bit to be determined this year because we don't have that LOI step. But I can say we do typically award about 20, usually have about 20 grant partners. Does that sound about right to you, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, it's really varied. And what you have to remember, as Kelsey said, we're just turning 20. So in the beginning, I think our grant amounts were maybe $5,000. We have increased our grant amounts over the years. And then what that may mean is fewer applications got granted in some years, but at higher amounts. We're certainly in just finishing this first generation of grant making, certainly always trying to up that game. But I would say that about 20 grant partners a year is usually pretty standard. And that we probably, to be honest, in my experience, get about twice that many applications. And again, that's why what we were talking about earlier with partial grant making, partial grant amounts also affects it, because that's a really hard decision for our grants committee sometimes as to more dollars in more hands or higher dollars in fewer hands. And we are really thoughtful about that every year. So I wouldn't put too much work into trying to compare what this year will look like compared to others, because it really does depend on the pool that we have and the opportunities to get you all going.
Yeah. Someone asked, if an organization is identified as faith-based, but the programs do not promote any particular religion, will it still be rejected? No, so we don't fund religious programs. We are open to funding religious organizations if the program itself is not promoting a particular religion. So, for example, if a church has a class specifically focused on medically accurate sex education and there's no religious component to it whatsoever, then that would still fall well within our grant making guidelines. So you're not rejected if the organization is religious purely on that basis.
Yeah, and honestly, having been on the grants committee, we've had many churches are places where we understand a lot of community activism happens. However, the goal would have to fit within what we talked about earlier, which is there's a focus on the experience, the lived experiences of those who identify as female, and we are trying to help them. So if it was, it happens that the church is like, listen, we want our women or, people who identify as female to be more economically empowered so that they can be more active, members of our community. And that's every Wednesday night, there's a session at the church. That is absolutely something we will fund. The question would be if it was, well, you have to partake in these religious teachings in order to be eligible, that probably would start to become a barrier for, depending on how it's described. So we do want people to be aware of that.
There's a question, do we have a track record of making grants to national organizations working on a local or state level effort? I think that happens pretty infrequently. It's not necessarily a restriction, but I do think most of the applications that we receive are local, local organizations. There are a few examples of where we fund statewide work, definitely, especially in the advocacy space. And I believe there are a couple examples where there are more national organizations that do have a specifically Ohio focus that we have funded. There's no real hard and fast rule around that, but typically the applications are more local.
Yeah, but for us, what I would say is that there are national organizations we understand that have chapters. So like Girls on the Run is a national organization. We have, if you look at our list, we do have made grants to Girls on the Run in this in our county, in our region. So yes, I would say that you will probably identify national organizations as you go, but I think that it always comes from the local, or very often comes from at least the local chapter of that. We've made grants to Girl Scouts, same thing. We've made grants to, so I guess yes, we have experience with that, but it's always going to have that Central Ohio lens. Or at least state located here and affecting the state, as Kelsey said.
Yeah. Someone asked if we could repeat the answer to the question about operating versus program funding. So there's one application only, and basically when you apply, you are applying for a specific program. So we want to know sort of what are your activities? What are you doing? You know, what is the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis to impact women and girls? But as part of the application, there's a budget section, and in the budget section is where you can identify that you're going to be spending the funds on operating costs. So when I mentioned the operating costs, I basically, when you fill out the budget, it says what would the funds be used for, and your options are salaries and benefits, program materials, equipment, occupancy, and a couple of different other categories. So what I wanted to highlight earlier was that salaries and rent are parts of running a program, and we totally understand that, and we're willing to fund that. But the application itself is a little bit more program based. Someone asked, what is the beginning and end of the grant year? And is this a 1-year grant? In the event of funding, how long do we have to spend the funds? So the beginning and end of the grant year is January 1 to December 31. It's a calendar year grant. It is a 1-year grant. So applying during this cycle means that you'll be awarded a 2022 calendar year. We call it our 2022 grant making cycle grant. You'll receive it in the early months of the year, probably March, based on our funding timeline. And then like Kelly said, you would be able to use it for any expenses that occur within that calendar year. So let's say you received the funds in March, you could still spend it on things that were spent in January of 2022. And you have until December 31st to spend those grant funds.
And obviously our goal, as I said, we do have to go through all the hoops here to get all the approvals of our board and, our grants committee. But our goal will be to get the checks out as soon as possible. So our hope would be that you would have it before March, but on the current timeline, but we are subject to all the appropriate approvals. So that's why we just want you to know that it's and that's where I said in the past, for those of you who have applied in prior years, pre-pandemic, we were able to move a little more quickly because we didn't have, we were able to gather people in different ways. So it is a little, that's why it's so important that you realize that if you've incurred an expense in January and you receive the check in February, you can still say as part of your final summary that you were able to use the funds we gave you to essentially reimburse yourself for whatever came out starting on January 1. All right.
Great. I will say too, this isn't in the slides, but it is in the grant making guidelines. There are some really small reporting requirements associated with our grants. I'm sure you were wondering about that. There'll be a quick touch base. We've really simplified this section as well in alignment with our goal to be a trust-based funder. We'll be doing a short touch base, probably a survey in the summer of 2022 for those that are awarded grants. And there will be a little bit more formal, but still very simple evaluation report due after the grant period, so after the calendar year. And that's just to ensure that basically that we have great data on the programs that we're funding. We want to see and hear the stories of the impact that you're having. And then like Kelly said, it helps us tell the story of what we're doing and secure additional funding so that we can continue growing our grant making pool. So just something not to be surprised by if you do get a grant.
And the last thing one of the last things I will say is that please understand, as I said earlier, it is always our goal to get more, raise more money ourselves so that we can make sure that you get these grants more easily and hopefully can build the capacity to basically fund yourself eventually without our grants process. We view ourselves as a tool in the process to get many of you off the ground. And we're very proud of being an early funder. We know that you have the capability to raise funds on your own, but it's not easy. And so the one thing I would say is that if you end up having a great experience with our grant making, just know that when those people ask, what does the Women's Fund do? You are essentially some of our best communicators to say, look, when we were trying to start a new program or something, we were able to get funding in a much different way from this organization, and it was really helpful. So never underestimate. We're here to help you. And sometimes if you also put a bug in the ear of other people, together we'll be able to do more, because the more that we can increase our grants budget, and the more we raise for it, the more we'll be able to give you a different experience with regard to some of the applications you'd like to make, and hopefully get you to a point where you don't have to apply for grants anymore and people are funding it directly. So we do believe we're in this together, but I would be remiss not to ask you all sometimes to help us explain to the world how important women's funds are to organizations like yours. You will be our very best storytellers, and we would appreciate, of course, that support.
A couple more questions here in the chat. This one said, will there be a recording of this session? Yes, we're going to be reposting the recording of the session as soon as it downloads to the cloud. We'll have that up on our website at womensfund.org/grants. We have another question there. What are some key standout points when applying to get funding? If we've been denied in the past, how do we just make sure that, what are some tips basically for submitting an application that might get funded? So obviously we don't have anything specific that will get you funding for sure. There's no magic keyword or anything like that. But I would say, spend a lot of time with our grant making guidelines to really understand what we fund, and specifically like what social change means. We are really looking for programs that are focused on that long-term systemic change to impact gender inequity. And so I think that as much specificity that you can add around that in your application as possible would be really helpful for you. Especially, being able to really clearly articulate the short-term and long-term social change, how your program fits into our priorities of disrupting gender norms, using a gender lens. Those are all really, really important pieces of the rubric. I would also say, aside from that, we'd be happy to, discuss this. I know that you said in the chat here that you have received the grant reader feedback in the past. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that if you'd like to talk further. But I think the best tip I could give would be to just spend a lot of time with our grant making guidelines and think about how you can clearly articulate how you fit in with those. But again, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to discuss that further.
And then one thing I would add too is remember, it is very unique that we have community grant readers, and we put a lot of confidence and faith in the work that they do as diverse voices at a table. And so remember that audience. I know it's different than a lot of the other grants that you apply for, and we hope it's better. But the point would be, we certainly understand, because we fill out a lot of grant applications ourselves. This is not going to a small committee of people at a company or, that will read this application. So do remember your audience as you're drafting the grant application, who's going to be reading this, because they score it. And as part of our mission and our trust-based philanthropy model, we trust what our grant readers tell us. And that means if it doesn't appeal to a girl and it's a program for girls, those girls at the table have very strong voices and may influence their group to score it differently. And so if you're used to applying to adults for girls programs, maybe remember you're also applying to girls with regard to this application, and they don't always understand the same words. So I would just, we know this is different, but what we're hoping is that we're also helping you build capacity in that you need to be thinking about, one of the great things about writing great grant applications, and Kelsey and I struggle with this every day, is how to try to draft for the particular entity that you're applying to. The other thing I would say is, in these really quick electronic world, and we try to be, as part of a trust-based model, we don't spell check everything. We don't, and we tell our grant readers, please don't score based upon the fact that something ended up misspelled or, however, when they have a lot of grants and they're trying to make decisions, everything that you do to show that you really are ready to execute the program that you're working on is helpful. So there are some easy things in this world. A spell check is great. Have someone read it with a fresh eye to make sure everything's capitalized and, those sorts of things. Sometimes that will help, a grant group that's really struggling over who gets a 70 and who gets, an 80, to say like, wow, this one really looks like they're rearing to go. Of course, we encourage our grant readers not to make substantive decisions based upon that, but sometimes a tiebreaker is still a tiebreaker. And so just always try to represent yourself really well. And that's not just for our organization, but I would say that's even more important for other grants you're applying for, where they are not as trust-based as we are. So it's just a good thing to always be thinking about with these applications.
Yeah, that's really great, Kelly. And another thing I would say as well is we did make some tweaks to the application this year to make it even more straightforward, a little bit clearer. And I think wherever you have the opportunity to include specifics about your program, that's always really helpful too. So, think about how someone reading this for the first time, who's never heard of your program, essentially walk them through it A to Z. And our questions this year reflect that thinking a little bit more about, like, if someone's never heard of this, what's the A to Z of this program? What are you going to be actually doing every day? And I think the questions this year might be a little bit more helpful with that as well. But I would definitely say, including specifics where you can, and helping the readers just understand what this is. And acting as if, they've never heard of this, and, that they're learning about your awesome program for the first time. I wanted to quickly pull up our website here to sort of show you where everything is at. So, like I said, if you go to womensfundcentralohio.org/grants/apply, you can also just go to our website and go to grants and click apply. You'll find everything that you need right here. So you can click our grant making guidelines. You can start an application. You can find the grant application template. That's the thing that I mentioned that has all the questions from the application in a Word document form that you can download. And then here's where you will also be able to find a recording of this webinar starting probably tomorrow. You'll be able to find it right here on this page. And then it also has our email address for any questions or technical assistance. So all of that can be found at womensfundcentralohio.org/grants/apply. And I will put that in the chat right now so that you can bookmark it if you want. Any final questions? Well, like I said, we are here to help you. You can call us anytime. If you call, I'll be the one that answers, probably managing our main line right now. You can also email us at grants@womensfundcentralohio.org. We know how it feels to submit a grant into the ether, and you don't know who's reviewing it or who you're going to talk to or who's going to get back to you. It will be one of our smiling faces, one of the three of us. So please know that we're here to support you. We really believe in the work that you're doing, and yeah, we're always here if you want to chat. So we really look forward to reading your applications.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'll stay on if you have any questions. You're welcome to stay on, but please feel free to hop off.
Bye-bye. Have a great day. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thanks.